Hello my precious little dragons and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you are new here, my name is Callista and my channel is mostly focused on talking about books I love with a little bit of beauty thrown in there. It's the punny name, a novel beauty. So thank you so much for being here today. We are going to be doing a book look, which I haven't filmed in probably well over a month, but the semester's over, so I am getting caught up on filming. Anyway, so we're doing a book look, finally, for a book I read last year. Oh, why do I like this? We are doing a book look on the Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang, which is a cute, adorable little romance. So I am going to prep my skin and read you the book synopsis for the Kiss Quotient. Stella Lane thinks math is the only thing that unites the universe. She comes up with algorithms to predict customer purchases, a job that has given her more money than she knows what to do with, and way less experience in the dating department than the average 30-year-old. It doesn't help that Stella has Asperger's, and French kissing reminds her of a shark getting its teeth cleaned by pilot fish. Her conclusion? She needs lots of practice with a professional. Which is why she hires escort Michael Fawn. The Vietnamese and Swedish stunner can't afford to turn down Stella's offer and agrees to help her check off all the boxes on her lesson plan, from foreplay to more than missionary position. Before long, Stella not only learns to appreciate his kisses, but to crave all the other things that he's making her feel. Soon, their no-nonsense partnership starts making a strange kind of sense, and this pattern that emerges will convince Stella that love is the best kind of logic. So, skin is prepped. I'm gonna bring you in a little bit closer. I feel like I just have like a really red apple sitting on my head. I'll let it down after I'm done with my makeup, but holy, my messy bun is very messy today. Alright, so let's get started talking about this book. I'm just now getting used to including like timestamps and stuff down in the description, but I finally figured out how to put timestamps in the actual like player of the video, so once we get to the spoiler section you can actually like skip there and like see the actual sections. I'm so excited, really. I'm finally figuring out how to do this YouTube thing. So I'm gonna say a couple things about my look today. So because Stella is rich as all get out, I'm using my bougie makeup today, but she's also extremely pragmatic, no nonsense, and so it didn't make sense to like have a lot of like play, like fun with her makeup, or with my makeup, like, because that wouldn't really feel like it fits the vibe of Stella or really the book, because it is about her sort of finding love, coming out of her shell. It just didn't feel sense to do like a super playful out there book look, so it's going to be a little bit more on the pragmatic, natural side, just with so much of my bougie makeup. It makes me feel better that I got about like 90% of this stuff on sale, but that's the only thing that makes me feel better about looking at my array of stuff. But it's also shiny and pretty and makes me happy, so. Okay, sorry, books. We're talking about the book. I am going to get us started with just some overall thoughts. And I just realized I forgot to grab my mirror, so I'm going to grab my mirror and then we will talk about my overall thoughts. Whoever can do makeup without a mirror is, I don't know, not me. There, it's on a Kleenex box. That works. That's the one thing I don't like about filming in here, is I can never figure out where to put my stupid mirror. Now we are going to talk about my overall thoughts on the book. So this is our non-spoiler section, of course. So first off, this is an Own Voices story about a woman with autism. So that was the first thing that sort of attracted me to this book, because, well, for a couple reasons. Just first, it's just good to read more Own Voices literature in general, but also just the representation in general for women with autism is pretty nil. There's a lot of talk in like the diagnostic world about, you know, is autism actually more prevalent in boys, or is it just we're really bad at diagnosing girls? I would lean towards we're really bad at diagnosing girls, and it's partially because they tend to express their symptomology just a little bit differently than a lot of boys do. You know, there's some sexist stuff at play there usually. Girls a lot of times mask their symptoms a lot more, and it's like that with ADHD too. Point being that there needs to be more autism rep for girls and women so they can realize that it's valid. And I think actually, because I read an interview with the author, and this was like a long while back, but she actually didn't realize she was autistic until a little bit later in life. And I can't remember if it was actually, I can't remember, it was while she was doing research for something. I don't know. I'm going to like link the interview that I read, because it's been a while and I don't want to misquote it. But essentially she discovered she was autistic a little bit later in life. Stella's actually not the only autistic rep in this book. Michael's cousin Skye also has autism, and he actually is the focus of one of the other books in their series. There's 3 of them. I've only read the Kiss Quotient so far, but one of the follow-ups focuses on Skye and one of them focuses on Quan, who are brothers, and they're both Michael's cousins. Anyway, so I think it's the Bride Test that focuses on Skye, so I'm interested to read that one at some point. I think it's really good to get more adult autistic rep, because so often you really only focus on kids and, you know, adolescents. I feel like a lot of people sort of just forget about autism once it's not focused on like kids and adolescents, but it's not like autistic people just stop existing once they turn 18. So I really appreciate having a story with people who have autism that is about adults, and it is definitely an adult book. This is not a YA, this is an adult book, which brings me to my next point. If you couldn't tell by the synopsis, this is a steamy book. It's fairly graphic sex scenes. I mean, I just read you the synopsis that it should be expected that this is an adult novel with adult things that happen. If that's not your cup of tea, it is central to the plot, so you can't really skim or skip over the sex scenes without potentially missing a lot of character growth and development stuff, because it's such a huge central part of the novel. So if that's really not okay with you, like you do not want to read sex scenes or anything like that and nothing graphic, then this probably isn't the book for you. Sometimes it makes me a little uncomfortable to read stuff like that, but I was so invested in the story and I really wanted to read it because I'd heard so many good things about the autism rep that I was like, okay, I'm going to just, like, I can deal with that, I want the story. That was my thoughts on that. So overall, I thought the characters seemed very well written and relatable. Even the side characters seemed like, well, for the most part, I'll get to one or two. But for the most part, like the side characters, the families, they all seemed like relatable people who all had their own agendas, their own biases, their own things going on in their lives that affected how they acted. I really just appreciated that, because you don't always get that cutesy rom-com sort of book, so I appreciated that it existed. And Stella and Michael in particular are just so cute. I mean, they're cute in very different ways, but they're both so cute. There were so many times that I was just like, oh, this is adorable throughout the entire story. Like, I feel like it kind of strikes a really good balance between giving you adorable cute scenes and giving you really steamy scenes. So if you're in it for both, you're gonna get both. I feel like most people in general like a really good balance of really cute romance stuff and really steamy romance stuff, and this book does a good job of balancing the two. The last thing I wanted to say before we get into our more spoiler section, there's a good amount of insta-love and other tropes. There's enough that's unique about the story that I feel like I can overlook more of it than I normally would, especially with a couple of the tropes, because I'm not a big fan of all of the tropes that are present in the book, and we will get to those. But it is kind of insta-lovey, so if that's not your thing, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Like I said, there is a lot that's really unique and really well done about the story. So there's some of the tropes I still don't like, and I wish they weren't there, but I will tolerate them for the sake of the overall story, you know? Alright, so next we're going to talk about the characters. So Stella, like I said, she's so adorable, so cute. I really just love the way you see her just sort of find her own rhythm and what works for her throughout the story. Like she changes, but she doesn't like fundamentally change who she is as a person, but she just becomes a little bit more open and more trusting and figures out what love is supposed to look like. Like, there's a lot that she changes about how she interacts with others, but she doesn't have to fundamentally, like, change who she is as a person or how she interacts with the world. It's a really good message for a neurodiverse character, because I feel like a lot of times they are told they have to change a lot of fundamentally who they are. They have to pretty much change and adjust everything about them to function in a world that wasn't designed for them. And so it was really refreshing to have the narrative be more like, you can be who you are. Like, you don't have to adjust who you are. It's just a matter of finding the people who uplift and support you and help you become the best version of yourself. And so that was a really refreshing message to get, I feel like. Especially since that's not a message I feel like you see very much. And just neurodiverse characters in general are, you know, only recently really becoming, you know, more common, I would say, or at least more accepted. But I really appreciated that was the direction that Hoang went with her story. I think that's one of the really good things about having own voices rep, because you do tend to get more storylines like that like acknowledge the struggles that the characters go through, but acknowledge that their lives are more than their struggles. Stella is neurodiverse and her autism is a big part of the story, but it's not the only thing about her that matters. You know, it's the story in essence is a lot about like her learning to find love, her learning how to open up to and trust people. For Michael, it's about a lot of the same. Like, it's about two people figuring out how they can trust each other and how they can make a relationship work, with a lot of cute stuff thrown in. I just really appreciated the story for a lot of reasons. So I'm going to tell you some stuff about Stella. So first off, she really likes martial arts movies and K-dramas. Like, that plays a part in the story. She also really loves playing the piano, and it's one of the few things that are in her very minimalistic house. Which, that's another thing she learns throughout the story, self-care. And just how to, like, kind of enjoy, like, take the joy in life. So there's this one line where it's saying she gave the piano her rage. And so you can really see a lot of her personality and how she interacts with and how she loves her hobbies. Hold on. Why is that focusing on? Oh, stop focusing on the books. Focus on me. Thank you. Okay, sorry. I don't know what I was doing there. So you can see a lot of her personality come out in how she interacts with her hobbies and the things that bring her joy. Or in this case, service stress relief when she's full of rage. Stella, at the beginning of the book, she's had some relationships, but really she hasn't had good ones. She's just kind of been used in her previous relationships, so they're focused more on her body and what she can give them than like really actually having a relationship with her. And there's this one line at the very beginning of the book where, you know, Michael says something about like the talking part of, you know, of sex, of the relationship, like where you just, you know, you have a healthy time with someone. And she was like, I've had sex, there is no talking part. And it's just like, your heart just kind of breaks for Stella, because she has had a lot of really negative experiences in her life. And part of it is just people really not being accommodating to her needs or treating her with respect that she's due, and it's really sad. But of course, you know, Michael is a sweet little cinnamon roll, and he treats her with respect and thoughtfulness, and it's very cute and very good. Her discovering that relationships can be good and healthy, and there is talking involved, and there can be a lot of joy in healthy, functional relationships. It's really just a fun, enjoyable part of the book. She's very naturally and unintentionally sort of funny. Like, I would say I laughed a lot throughout the book, just because of how Stella and Michael interact with each other, stuff they both say independently. They're just both really sort of funny characters, but I think I found Stella the funniest. I just love how she connects with others and forms relationships. Like, she's just kind of a joy to read, you know? I felt like she was a real person who could just walk off the page. Alright, Michael. So, Michael is Vietnamese Swedish American, as we learned by reading the synopsis. So he is a very sweet guy. He is a tailor, he is an escort, he is a man with a heart of actual gold. He is very precious. I mean, because Stella has this very sort of like rough, pragmatic exterior. Her whole life is minimalist and scheduled to a T. She just does her thing and lives her life, and she's okay with it. And, you know, it's not that Michael's like spontaneous, but he's very emotional and open. I feel like a lot of open yourself up stories, like it's like with the character who's very like pragmatic. First off, usually the character that's pragmatic would be the guy, not the girl. But also, I feel like usually it's about like openness to experience with like big things like travel and like all of these big adventures, or let's go on a spontaneous cross-country road trip and you know, that kind of thing. Whereas this book is more about openness in relationships, openness and connecting with other people. And so it's still that same dynamic, but it's done a little differently than it's done in a lot of other books. As I mentioned, Michael is a very sweet cinnamon roll, and I would give him my whole heart. Yep. Anyway, he has a lot of ish going on in his family. His, like, some stuff goes down with his, or has gone down with his dad, who is not around in the book, and his mom was sick, and he has a lot of bills to pay, which is why he became an escort in the first place. Yeah, he's just very adorable, and I love the way you see his relationship with his family throughout the book. They play a huge role in his life, and, you know, because he's the big brother, he kind of watches out for everyone, and you see a lot of dynamic, different sides to Michael. You know, you see how he interacts, you know, with Stella, and then you see how he interacts when he's with Quan or with his family, or, you know, when he is having to play more the provider role with his family as opposed to the son, the brother. You can kind of see how he like switches between roles. He just has a lot going on. So he is described to look as like Daniel Henney, but better. So alright, so basically he's very, very hot. There was this woman that when he first meets Stella, because, I mean, that whole first encounter is interesting, which we'll get to in the plot section, but he's like, this girl was different, and it's just like just the way the scene was framed, it's just like, okay, so Michael is definitely a sapiosexual. He really likes his women to be highly intelligent. That turns him on. He's like, yes, the smart girls for me, please. And I love it. It's great. I mean, you know, you would expect sort of the way he's described. Like, he does kendo, he's an escort, he's a tailor, he's da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, like all this stuff. You would kind of expect him to sort of have this like big himbo energy, like just full puppy dog personality. And he really doesn't. Like, he's definitely very smart, he's motivated, he's goal-driven. It's just so much of his character is about his emotions, about him wearing his heart on his sleeve. It's like his emotionality is a huge part of his personality, but that makes his dynamic to Stella really interesting, and I really appreciate him. He's just a true soft boy. I love him. He's so adorable. He's so adorable. Okay, so next we are going to talk about Quan. So Quan, as I mentioned, is one of the cousins. So he is more of the focus in one of the follow-up stories, less so in this one. In this one, he's just a really good, solid, supportive side character. You know, he's not just Michael's cousin, he's also kind of his best friend. The few interactions he does have with Stella, like there's one scene in particular that's just very, very sweet between the two of them that I really appreciated. And yeah, he's a good dynamic character. I'm sure that you get more from him in his own book. Philip is Stella's coworker, and he is essentially the nasty, creepy coworker. That's it, that's his personality. He is not one of the dynamic characters. He kind of plays an antagonistic role in the story. Yeah, that's that. Alright, and then the parents. So, I really liked Michael's mom. She's very sweet, very practical, just coming in with the food and the advice. She doesn't have a ton of page time, but you can tell how whole and dynamic of a character she is more by how Michael speaks and thinks so highly of her and how he loves and respects her than by what she actually says on the page. And then Stella's parents are an interesting bag, and I'm going to talk more about them in the plot section because they're not a huge part of the book. But they do kind of have this interesting role switch, like, later on in the story that I just thought was interesting. Alright, so with that, we are going to move on to the spoiler section. So from this point forward, there will be spoilers because we are going to talk about the plot and stuff. So, they won't be super in-depth spoilers, but if you want to avoid any and all spoilers, feel free to skip ahead to my final look and thoughts. If you do that, I will see you then. If not, and you want to stick around, awesome, we're going to talk about plot stuff. So I would say we're gonna kind of go from start to finish. At the very beginning of the story, Stella's mom is very pushy, and she also has this sort of like fix-it view of autism that's very present in a lot of places. And so her relationship with Stella is not strongest at the beginning, mostly because of a lot of that stuff. So there's all of that. And then, her dad is sweet. He's just a little less, like, he doesn't take as much initiative, usually. He just kind of lets his wife do all the stuff. So, at the beginning of the story, you're kind of, like, wary of the dynamics there, I would say. Especially because Stella's an adult, and they sort of don't treat her like it. So, there's all of that. And then, so Stella, as we established by reading the synopsis, she decides that she wants to get better at sex, so she hires an escort and basically wants someone who will have multiple sessions with her to teach her how to do sex better. So she schedules her first night with Michael, and that whole first night is just a very interesting, the whole dynamic is interesting, the getting to know you, the instant chemistry, the way you immediately see Michael's very sweet patient side come out, even though he literally doesn't know this lady at all. But he just sees how stressful the entire thing is for her, and even though he has, like, you know, he doesn't know she's autistic, like, he doesn't know any of this stuff, he just sees that she needs to be comfortable, and that is really important to him, so he takes everything really slow, he's very gentle, he sort of realizes that he needs to let Stella have control and Stella needs to take the lead, even though he's the one, like, teaching. And Michael is not sure about the whole, like, multiple sessions thing. Like, that was one of his rules at the beginning, was like, he was like, he doesn't sleep with any client more than once because he knows he gets too emotionally connected, and he had, like, a bad experience with the client and he doesn't want that to happen again. So he's just like, I sleep with people once, I get my money so I can pay my mom's medical bills, that's it, that's what I do. And then of course, because the plot has to happen, that doesn't happen. But that first night, you get so many good little moments with the characters. It's a really, really good sort of romance establishing scene. Wow, that printer shows up a lot more on the camera than it does in real life. Huh. Sorry. I get distracted very easily. So I really loved the dynamic of that whole scene. I also loved how it established a lot of Stella's particular symptomologies and the way that she's had to learn to adapt to function in a world that doesn't accept neurodivergence. So you even see stuff about, like, she has rules about eye contact. So you count to 3 seconds in your head. That's how you learn to hold eye contact. That's how you learn to function correctly in society. She has a lot of little rules and stuff like that. Help her do her best to appear normal. And so I just thought that there was a really, really good job of establishing all of those little character things in this kind of, like, one, like, it's in the span of one night, it's in one room, it's very contained, but I think that is probably one of the best parts of the book, and one of my favorite parts of the book, because it just does such a good job of setting everything else up. Like, even if I wasn't the biggest fan of some of the other stuff in the story, I really loved the way that Hoang established her characters in that section. Also, her list was initially just, it was really funny, mostly just because of Michael's reactions to the list. I'm doing a really bad job at looking at the camera to see how much time I have left today. Anyway, so what I was hopefully saying was something about how good Hoang is at establishing characters and doing establishing scenes and stuff. It's probably what I was saying. I don't need to do this much bronze, but I feel pale and sickly today, and I want to bring life to my face. So that's what I'm doing. I was going to do. I think I'm going to mix these two, because that is, yeah, that's definitely too warm. Sorry, I'm doing a little color mixing here. And her list initially was like really funny. Mostly just Michael's reactions to the list just had me actually laughing out loud. Like I said, you know, there's some serious stuff in the book, but there's a lot of comedy to it. There's a lot of moments where you just laugh out loud, and I really love that. Especially, you know, because it's a rom-com, so you expect to hopefully laugh out loud at some point. One would hope. So there's this other scene. It's one of the slightly more serious ones where they end up going to a bar, and Quan's there. Michael goes up to this blonde that's an ex-client because she almost caused a scene, but like Stella doesn't know a lot of the context of what's happening with this, and that scene described sensory overload so well. Like really well. Like I feel like if you hadn't experienced it at all before, it would really help you sort of understand what sensory overload feels like. And I haven't had sensory overload in the sense of like the way probably a lot of in quite the way it's described in the book, but I, you know, having generalized anxiety disorder, crowds do tend to spike my anxiety significantly, so I've experienced some sort of like adjacent sort of aspects to sensory overload. I do get kind of sensory overload when it comes to like loud noises, big crowds, stuff like that. Not quite to the same intensity as Stella does, but just the way it's described, it felt very real. I was like, yeah, this sounds about right. So I really appreciated how well that was described. And then I also appreciated how, this is the scene I was talking about earlier where Quan just comes in and it's just very sweet. You know, he just helps her in general, and it was very wholesome. And he kind of catches on, like he figures out that she has autism because so does his brother. He, you know, he agrees like, yeah, I'm not gonna tell Michael if you don't want him to know, like, it's not my place. Wait, I mean, kind of. We'll get to that in a second. But he doesn't outright tell Michael. Like I said, didn't outright tell Michael, but he is kind of like, don't you think she's like high? Like he's not subtle. And then Michael still like doesn't get it. He's like, whew, like Quan drops so many hints, and he's not subtle. Mostly just because he really wants to make sure that Michael is gentle and careful and good to Stella. So all the good intentions, while also trying to keep his promise not to tell Michael, but like that dynamic, that section was just interesting. And like I said, Michael does not catch on until really close to the end of the book. It's kind of sad how long it takes him to realize, especially given Quan's not subtleness. Get to his day job as tailor, which he's really good at. He wants to be a designer, he wants to do all that. And then there's a dinner with his family that does not go well, which is partially just because of, you know, noises and crowds and new scenarios, and it doesn't go well. But their makeup is really cute. They're just falling really hard for each other. I will say there's, and the quote kind of, but the language itself is present throughout a lot of the book. But the one quote I sort of marked is talking about like being very possessive, like mark them as mine. And so there is this sort of possessive language used throughout the book, and it just feels a little icky to me, even in a romance context. Like, you know, fully consensual, they're both falling for each other, but I just don't really like possessive language in romance, and they do both use that language fairly regularly. It's all about like, you know, mark them as mine, make them mine. It's possessive, and I'll talk more about that in kind of my final thing, but I just wanted to sort of talk about that specifically here because it happens at about that point in the book, because that's when they're really starting to like develop the relationship more. So then there's like a ball coming up and Michael agrees to make the dress for her, and then stuff goes quite badly at the ball and his old obsessed client shows up. Yep. Does not go well. I strongly dislike her. And then you find out more about stuff with Michael's dad and how he sort of has some trust issues as well because of his dad, who was a con artist. And he's still dealing a lot with this sort of emotional abuse and betrayal that was present in his past. It informs a lot of how he approaches his relationships as well. Like, even though he's a very emotional and caring person, he's not necessarily a trusting person. Like, the whole plot is sort of finding out how both of them learn to trust in relationships and overcome their own sort of emotional blocks. But yeah, so there's this whole big thing. There's misunderstanding. He leaves. Stella's dad is being blech and chummy with Philip, who's nasty. Her mom actually does this role reversal and stands up for Stella, which is not quite what you'd expect from like the beginning of the book. Like, at the beginning I would have said it would have been the opposite, like her dad would be the one standing up for her, but no, there's just this switch. And you do see how much like how much her mom really cares for her. She does her best. Again, there's all of this stuff like Michael was mint chocolate chip for her, and there's misunderstandings about his reasons for returning the check to Stella, and like the check for their lessons and stuff like that. Like there's just misunderstanding on both sides. But then Stella's like, she has renewed self-confidence and determination. She's like, this is where she gives the piano her rage and she goes shopping for perfume. Ooh, perfume. Haha, she goes shopping for perfume and then it's like they're trying and there's still just all these crossed wires and stuff. It's like, come on, please, just get it together. And you can tell you're kind of coming up to these like big sort of emotional moments where they're either going to not be able to overcome them and get together, or they're going to work it out. But there's just so much emotionally going on here. And he does the designs for Stella, but he misunderstands about the purpose, and then so much misunderstanding in this whole section. And then he, like, there was this part where he, should I spoil it? Oh, we're in the spoiler section, you guys expect it. Anyway, when he destroys all of his garments and sketches, and it's just like he destroyed them dream by dream, and then, you know, like he sews someone else's designs, and I'm just like, no, why, Michael? Michael, no. And he's just like, and just that moment, I was so sad for Michael. He's just like, he's just so heartbroken. And like I said, he just wears his heart on his sleeve. But his mother gives him a talking to, and I was just like, thank you, Maya. Thank you. I appreciate you. She's like, she just tells him to fight for his relationship with Stella, and like, he's like his dad, but with a heart. And I'm just like, oh damn, man. And then, so, yeah, there's this stuff, and it's like it's my Stella, and every mother-in-law wants a daughter-in-law who can get down to business, and just, this whole section, I was just like, okay, we're getting somewhere, and then, his mother's spools are miraculously covered, and I'm just like, I wonder who did that. I wonder which very rich person did that. You find out at this point he told his mom they had insurance when they didn't, and he was just paying for everything out of pocket for her medical bills, and that's why he escorted, which you already knew he escorted because of mysterious bills, and you probably put it together before then, but that's when kind of everything comes out, and you're just like, so sweet. Anyway, so then Stella also gets an internship interview for Jamie, which is Michael's sister. You also find out more of Michael's backstory at this point. Like, you find out, like, he originally got into engineering schools, but his dad refused to pay for, design schools because that was his passion, that was what he wanted to do. But he could do engineering or he could do nothing, so. Yeah, this part of the story focuses really heavily on sort of Michael's emotional transformation, and I really appreciated it. And like, there was a quote that was like, all of the bars of his cage were gone, but he was still sitting in the same spot. afraid. And there was a lot of really good quotes like that where you really saw into what the character was experiencing, what they were exactly going through, and I just really, really loved it. And you see him realize he can ask for help, he can, you know, he can sort of lean on other people, and you see him start to slowly overcome this, slowly start to grow from this bad place of emotional abuse and betrayal that he had experienced before. He asks Quan to go into business with him, so he's going to slowly start to build up his dreams. And at the same time that Michael's finally getting his ish together, Stella, with her renewed confidence, is just like, well, I'll try it with Philip, who, as I mentioned, is you. Philip just talks about himself the entire time, and he's like, I think we get along well. And I'm like, you talked about yourself the entire time when he tries to kiss her. It's just the contrast between how Michael treats Stella and how Philip treats Stella, astounding. And so then of course there's this like slightly tropey cliche moment where like Michael and Quan are across the street and they see Philip try to kiss her, but like it's obviously not consensual. And then, you know, Quan like lets Michael go. He's like, go get him. And Michael just goes straight in to punch Philip, and he's like fighting for her, devising a battle plan. I mean, actually, like, there was the actual fighting for her, and then the fighting for her where he sends flowers and gifts and stuff. And then, like, Philip also uses this possessive language that I mentioned I don't like before, but it's a lot nastier when it's not consensual, because it's like, we're dating. We went on one date. You know, that... The possessive language very much gets out of control, and you do get this one sort of glimpse at Philip being a dynamic character with his own issues, because he like mentions he has a therapist and he has issues too. He knows he's an a-hole. So I kind of wish, and there wasn't really time to do the book, so I'm not mad it's not there, but I kind of wish we got slightly more fleshed out about his character, because in general that just seemed like kind of a throwaway line, like, oh, well, he's an a-hole, but he goes to a therapist. He's working on stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay. But then he's immediately still a nasty human who goes and grooms another person to be, yeah, Philip's just, he's a case. Then you quickly exit out of this whole Philip subplot. That's done. You're done with the Philip. And you go back to Michael and Stella trying to work it out. At that point, you're like, okay, they're gonna get back together. They're just holding out, and you're just kind of waiting for it, because Michael's fighting for her, Stella's going out because she's convinced she's a charity case, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. He sends a karate bear, like, fun fact. And then they finally are getting ready to go out together, and one thing I should mention is Stella calls her vagina her sex, which I've seen the phrase used before. I hate that phrase. Just call it what it is. Call it your vagina. Stop calling it your sex. It sounds so weird. Like I can't explain why it makes me uncomfortable every time it's used, but just every time a character is like, my sex, I'm like, it's your vagina. Yeah. I don't know why it bothers me so much, but it's just, it just does. So it makes me like uncomfortable. I don't know. Anyway, that was very much an aside, but I just wanted to mention it in case you also get very uncomfortable when characters call their vaginas their sex, or my sex, or whatever. It's just, it's weird. Am I the only one that thinks that? If you also think this is weird, please let me know. That would make for a very weird conversation in the comments. Maybe don't let me know, but I also want to feel validated, so I don't know, do what you will. Anyway, they're getting back together, of course. It's very cute. They're gonna try and make it work. They get back together. It's very cute. And then he tells her in advance that he's going to ask her to marry him in 3 months. And they describe it as like 2 lonely halves who found love together. It's very cute. Then you jump to 4 months later, where Michael is pursuing his passion to be a designer. There's like children's designs. He's doing really well. Stella's economic charts help a lot, because remember, she's really good at doing the economics of figuring out what people are gonna buy. So that's like that's her specialty. Oh, and I forgot to mention, at the very, very beginning of the book, she's offered a promotion, but she doesn't want to have to like supervise people, so she turns it down. And then at the very end of the book, she's finally accepted the promotion that she turned out at the beginning, because you gotta have that like numerical approximation of character growth. It's like See, at the beginning of the book, she didn't want to interact with people and didn't think she was capable. But at the end of the book, she's realized that she's very capable and she's very confident. This it's like so sarcastic. Like, it was really sweet. I really enjoyed that part. I'm just, I don't know. I'm in a weird mood today. And then the way you see Michael's character growth is that he agrees to let her buy him gifts. It's economics. That's the end. Okay, so hold on, I have to take my hair down so I can do the final summary. This is my final look. So it actually didn't turn out quite as dramatic as I was worried about at the beginning, because like when I was starting, I was like, oh my goodness, this looks too dramatic for what I'm going for. But I think it turned out cute, kind of simple, practical, with all the bougie makeup I could muster. Anyway, let's talk about the book. So it is formulaic at points, but in my opinion, the formulas are enjoyable to read. Who cares? There was a lot of tropes used in the book. Some of them I enjoyed, some of them I didn't. But overall, there was so much uniqueness to the plot, and the romance was so cute, and like the formulas weren't enough to make me dislike the story. They weren't enough to take away from the unique things that Hoang did really, really well. I just thought overall it was really well done. I saw some people that were saying it didn't seem like a realistic depiction of autism. Like, I read through some of the views and I was really surprised to see that. And I was like, it's own voices. So first off, its own voices, which there's something to be said first. Like, it can be own voices. Like, the message they're trying to say might not be getting across to the general audience. Maybe it was that. What I was thinking was more that, like, I can see the argument that some of her symptoms seem inconsistent, particularly surrounding her relationship with Michael. However, symptomology is weird, and connection and feeling safe also has something to do with your symptomology. Like, it has something to do with how you present stuff, specifically when it comes to tactile stuff. So, and that was what I saw a lot of people were saying, and I was like, well, I mean, everyone experiences things differently. You're not going to find one single presentation of autism. Specifically because it's an adult woman who has learned how to have her little ways of functioning in a neurotypical world. You're going to probably see some differences in presentation to how you might stereotypically think of autism, because women present differently. Like, people who have learned to hide a lot of their symptomology, to mask it, react differently. And like I said, feeling safe and secure with somebody also has a lot to do with it. I don't want to get into a clinical thing. Basically, everyone experiences things differently, and it's okay that sometimes you have different levels of symptomology when you're with one person over with another, because you feel safe with one person or in one environment and you don't in another. Like, you're probably going to act and exist a little differently in your safe spaces than you are in like a totally new environment. That's why there was such a stark difference between when you see Michael and Stella interacting when they're alone and when Stella and Michael are at the bar. There's a very vast difference there, and a lot of it has to do with safety and comfort. So that's pretty much all I'm gonna say with that, except that also it was established early on that she does actually enjoy touch when she has time to prep and prepare for it. The thing that she doesn't like is when it comes as a surprise and she doesn't have that time to prepare. I can't say what perspectives those reviewers were coming from when they were saying they didn't think it was good rep or inconsistent, but that's my take on it. Do with it what you will. My problems came more with like the possessiveness on all fronts. I touched on it a little bit in the spoiler section. If you weren't there for that, basically both Michael and Stella use fairly possessive language, and then Philip also uses possessive language. And I know it's a fairly common sentiment for people in relationships to be like, well, she's mine, he's mine, I want to make you mine, I want to mark you as mine, stuff like that. Like, that's a fairly normal thing, but I just really wish that that narrative around possessiveness in romantic relationships wasn't so normalized, because it can turn unhealthy so fast. And I think that's probably part of what Philip was functioning as. It was showing this like unhealthy possessiveness, but like Michael and Stella are healthy possessiveness, and I'm just like, I just don't like it in general. Like, your whole individual people, that exist and work together, like you aren't. I just think that it generally can turn toxic really fast, and it's probably better just to avoid that language overall, but it's just my opinion. I also saw someone mention that like Michael refuses to accept no for an answer and they don't actually think he's, or like insisting she would like stuff. I didn't see that as much when I was reading, and maybe I just didn't see it. Like I said, there was possessiveness usually in the language on both fronts, but like they didn't really act as much possessive over each other. And he was usually like so thoughtful and careful in his relationship with Stella, like that seemed like it was primary, so maybe I just missed where they were saying that he was refusing to accept no. He did refuse to accept gifts from her, but that was because of other stuff going on in his life. So yeah, I wanted to mention that I've seen that criticism and I didn't recognize it as much as present. But if you also recognized something along those lines and want to talk about it, feel free to. Like, maybe I just completely missed it. It's also a possibility. Okay, let's talk about this misunderstanding. So there's a lot of misunderstanding going on in this book, which is not one of my favorite tropes. So one thing is, at the very least, this misunderstanding stemmed from the characters' insecurities and their predetermined assumptions about how people work, about how the world works. And these were fairly consistent throughout the story until you got to like the character growth part. So it actually seemed like a realistic misunderstanding as opposed to like, I overheard the wrong phrase and now I'm just running with it. Shakespeare. Like, so I do appreciate that that was the route she took with the misunderstanding. I still don't like misunderstanding as a trope. And that's all I will say on that. So if you don't like misunderstanding at all, if you refuse to read a book that has the misunderstanding trope, this is not the book for you, because basically from the half point on there's so much freaking misunderstanding. It is so present. It is the entire last conflict is all misunderstanding. One thing I did note that was just interesting, and it was just like a little language thing, was that they used Asperger's early on, and it was also in the synopsis I noticed when I read that, which isn't technically a diagnosis anymore. It's all autism spectrum disorder. But I know there's also a lot of people who still really connect heavily to that term, and it's really a part of their identity to use that term, Asperger's. So I was like, okay, that's fine. We can use that term. And then they kind of switched over and they just referred to it as autism for like the rest of the story. And so I just thought that was like a weird little, I don't even know if it was an inconsistency, like maybe it was intentional, maybe it wasn't, but I just thought it was interesting. It was just something I noticed. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's a really cute story. It's like a perfect balance of cute and steamy. I really loved like Stella and Michael. I loved their relationship dynamic. I loved the way you saw their growth throughout the story. Nothing in the story was huge or dramatic in terms of like action, but like it was very emotionally driven, and I really appreciated that in a rom-com. Like I feel like a lot of times it's all about the big gestures, and this one it's like it's more about these characters learning to trust and exist in a healthy relationship together, and I really appreciated it. So if you're in the mood for a very cute rom-com story that has Own Voices autism rep and, you know, has some like has a lot of like Vietnamese culture in there. My camera had to cool down for like 5 minutes, so I don't remember what I was saying. I think it was pretty much done. So yeah, I loved the book. It's really adorable. I would suggest it. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you wouldn't mind liking, commenting, subscribing, all of those YouTube-y things, that would be awesome. It helps my channel grow. So I hope you all have an amazing day. Stay magic, keep reading, I love you all so much. Goodbye!